I once saw a vote box being emptied onto a table at a count in a place called Oldham in the north of England, and unbelievably, of the 1,000 or so ballots that were in that box, the percentage that were voting for Labour was 100. That is literally impossible. So, that is what keeping Sadiq Khan holding on in London, is the power of that postal vote.
It's kind of funny because I remember when I met you for breakfast one morning and we took a picture and I posted the picture and then people were saying, oh, look, you're with that racist. And meanwhile, we sat there for 2 hours, we talked about freedom, we talked about liberty, all this stuff. And it's very similar to going to a Trump rally when I started going to those rallies. And I'm thinking, oh, am I going to see these racists here or something like that? And it's the happiest, most joyful people who in many cases are not political at all. They're just there because they want to express some level of freedom, something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this has been a constant attempt by the left to tarnish us with this racism word, and it just doesn't work anymore. The real racists are actually those behind Black Lives Matter. And I really mean that. When Martin Luther King said in that amazing speech, and what an orator the guy was, but when he said, I want my 4 children to be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And now what's happening through BLM and elsewhere is we are dividing people up into different groups, dividing them up on the grounds of race, ethnicity, gender, whatever else it may be. And that is disastrous. That is destructive. That is the real racism. And I loathe it. And I want to live in a country where everybody is treated exactly the same. Because if you start giving special privileges to certain groups, you then automatically alienate other groups who feel left out. A free, fair society would have equality of opportunity for all. And of course, I condemn and loathe racism. And yes, there is a fringe on the extreme right who I think they would have nothing to do with whatsoever. But you're quite right. Whether it was my UKIP supporters, my Brexit Party supporters, Trump supporters at the rallies, these are very, very good, decent people. And the more mainstream media, or Hillary Clinton, point fingers at them and call them deplorable or ignorant or stupid, the greater their resolve to fight back.
What do you make about how the BLM movement, some of the Antifa stuff, that now that is being exported? I mean, you guys are seeing some of that on the streets of London now, and it's happening in other Western countries as well.
Yeah, within 24 hours of the death of George Floyd, within 24 hours, there were riots in the streets of London. So don't tell me this was a spontaneous outpouring. This was all planned. They've been waiting for the opportunity. I was disgusted. To see the cenotaph in London, the monument to 1.5 million dead fighting for liberty in 2 world wars, to see that desecrated, to see the Churchill statue repeatedly desecrated. And what stunned me was to see British police officers taking the knee in the streets.
And your police officers don't even have guns.
They don't. Well, some do, but I think we're going to have to, that's a policy that will need to change, no question about that. But to take the knee, and I was going on UK TV and radio and writing, saying to everybody, understand what this is. If this organization was genuinely about equality, genuinely about getting rid of racial prejudice, I'd have no problem with it whatsoever. But the truth of it is, and you've only got to read their website. They tell you they're an avowedly Marxist organization intent on defunding the police, bringing down Western capitalism, and for a new Marxist order to take its place. That is what they're doing. They are trying to destroy us. And yet, I've been horrified on both sides of the pond to see big corporations, trying to say wonderful things about them. I even saw St. John's Church opposite the White House. I was there yesterday, and they've got a Black Lives Matter poster. What is going on? Don't people realize this is a bad, dangerous organization. So these are things that really grieve me. And it's the lack of courage of enough people to stand up and tell the truth for fear of being called racist.
So with that all in mind, what do you think is going to happen with this mayoral race in London? Because it looks a little messy at the moment.
Well, one of the things that has changed politics in the United Kingdom has been postal voting, early mail-out voting. We've seen it abused again and again and again. There is no country in which this is safe. And I was trying to warn America this time last year that if you went down this route, the left will always win at this. Because you see, if you think you're morally superior, cheating is quite an easy thing to do. Whereas our side won't cheat. And I'm pleased to say that, really. But you're never going to win. The one country that's got this right is France. Now, the French don't get much right, in my opinion. But the one thing they've got right, they've seen how open postal voting is to fraud, intimidation, and abuse, and they've banned it completely. So do you know what they do in France? If you want to vote in France, I'll tell you what happens. You go along to the local hall, you show your identification, you're given a piece of paper, you go into a polling booth, in secrecy, you put a cross next to the candidate or party you prefer, and after that, there are no voting machines used. There's no need for those. They're manually counted, they're put in piles and totaled up. And that is free and open democracy. There's a big lesson we can learn from it. Now, what Khan has got going for him in London is they've signed up vast numbers of the Muslim population to these postal votes. And I know that in those communities, the women are signed up for postal votes, but do you actually think they ever get the chance to exercise that? Of course they don't. I once saw a vote box being emptied onto a table at a count in a place called Oldham in the north of England, and unbelievably, of the 1,000 or so ballots that were in that box, the percentage that were voting for Labour was 100. That is literally impossible. So, that is what's keeping Sadiq Khan holding on in London, is the power of that postal vote. But even in London, which has been the great Labour stronghold, even there, the party is now seriously on the decline.
What do you think of my friend Laurence Fox? Do you think he has a chance to actually, from a true liberal perspective, do you think he has a chance to fight off the progressive movement onslaught?
Look, I admire Laurence. I like Laurence. I mean, he's a great guy. And the next time you're in London, we'll go out together. He is a great guy to be with. Starting new political movements from scratch.
You know a little something about this.
I mean, it's done. It took me so many years to get UKIP set up. I mean, in the end, we had 400 chapters around the country, millions of supporters, but it doesn't happen overnight. Now, the things that Laurence is battling for are fundamentally important issues. It is about the relationship between the individual and the state. And this is something that we've always prided ourselves on, frankly, ever since Magna Carta. But going all through the years, we've been the freest of all European countries. In fact, the freest of all the English-speaking world. We've never had to have ID cards or any of these things. Now with COVID, we've seen those liberties stripped away in the most remarkable and very hasty fashion. So look, Laurence, in terms of making the arguments, he's in the right place. I wish him well, but if I'm being honest with you, it's going to take a lot of years to build a movement that's big enough to be effective.
Do you make a distinction at this point between someone that would say they're an old school liberal and a conservative? Is there any distinction worth mentioning at this point?
Well, I mean, it's a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, if you'd said to me 20 years ago, Nigel, where are you on the left-right spectrum, I'd have called myself a Gladstonian liberal. Gladstone was a liberal prime minister back in the 19th century, but one who believed in freedom of the individual, believed in the country.
A JFK Democrat from our perspective, basically.
Yeah. I have to say, I've stopped using the word.
I get it.
Classical liberalism. If you go to the Oxford Union, and debate with some of the brightest students in the world, maybe there you can talk about classical liberalism. If you try and talk about classical liberalism to anybody else, they sort of, if they're conservatives, just go mad because
Right.
the word liberal now means illiberal. The liberals want to ban everything. The liberals want to control everything. The liberals don't even believe in free speech. So yeah, classical liberalism, I'm afraid, is only for the debating chamber.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about international issues instead of nonstop yelling, check out our international playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.